Okay, now we're back for part two of speaking with Todd Marlette for Unraveling Intellectual Property with Michael Stein. We've already learned some very interesting information. Why don't you tell us, I mean, were you handling a lot of cases? Were you just overseeing the cases? How much what was the balance between work given to outside firms versus what you were doing?
Right. Well, things have changed over 13 years, but there was a point in time for probably two-thirds of my career where 100% of the drafting was done by outside counsel. So you had 100 in-house counsel reviewing the work of outside counsel, and that was distributed across the world, if you will. One of the major areas was standards essential patents. And so anytime the standards committees would get together, there would be a flurry of invention disclosure forms. And then we had to make sure that they were properly prepared and filed. And because that was one of the key ways where Qualcomm derives value is to create standards proposals. And hopefully, if they become adopted by the standard, and then we secure those with patents, then we can license those.
So you said things changed over time. So
Right.
did you start to do more of the actual application writing or
Well, well, that's right. So towards the end of my career, there were some changes in the landscape of intellectual property, and they wanted to make sure that everybody that was in-house still had the skills that the patent attorneys for outside counsel have. Because if we weren't doing the actual fingers on the keyboard, then maybe some of our skills were getting lost a little bit. So then there were some changes where we could elect to either do a fixed number of office action responses, or you could draft a number of cases throughout the year. And so it was a choice. So that's what we did towards the end.
I mean, as far as hours and stuff, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't just a pure 9 to 5. I mean, were you working as hard as people at a law firm? Were you working weekends?
You know, it's interesting and it's different. I think that the amount of time was probably greater than working at an outside law firm,
Hmm.
but the intensity it was a little more regulated unless there was big litigation going on. So yeah, thinking back a little bit, it was pretty much more manageable. And one of the big benefits that I've noticed about being in-house was the access to information. So, for example, the inventor creates the invention disclosure form,
Yeah.
and as outside counsel, that you get one interview with the inventor and you're stuck with the four corners of the invention disclosure. Whereas in-house, you have the opportunity to call the inventor, have a private Zoom meeting, get co-inventors, and then also you can leverage the enormous amount of internal resources that you have for related cases. So with such diverse technology, you could really educate yourself a lot easier with for the technology. So that was easier, whereas outside counsel, it can be a little more challenging.
Yeah, I've done pretty complex applications where I get the one bite at the apple, I should say.
Right.
Were you doing any licensing, litigation support? Because I don't think you're a litigator as far as I
Well,
recall.
well, no. But what we would do is litigation support would be one of our primary roles. Um, So let's see. There's the big ones that have the Wikipedia pages with Qualcomm versus Broadcom, Qualcomm versus Apple, Qualcomm versus Nokia. So those were some big cases. One of my jobs as portfolio manager was to try to find the cases that would be, on the short list to for secondary review for internal review and external review for assertion. So there was so for example, if there was big litigation, we would have a group of, it would start maybe with 1,000 cases, and we would whittle it down to maybe 200 cases. And then there would be meetings where we would get together and have those cases where we would do first pass claim charts. And then we would have the meetings with the outside counsel. They would do their review, and then we would negotiate on our interpretation versus outside counsel's interpretation of the technology and for selecting cases for assertion. So we were directly involved in that process, but there was a separate group for litigation that would do the case management of the litigation firms, and that was a different department under corporate legal.
And before the podcast, you were talking about valuation, metrics. So can you tell me a bit more about what you were referring to?
Oh, certainly. So the landscape for in-house counsel has changed a lot now versus how it was maybe 10, 15 years ago. Basically, everybody gets statistics. So there are statistics on outside counsel. So they want to know you're going to get a quality score on every single case that you touch, and your name is going to be associated to it, and that's going to go into an internal database. Likewise, in-house counsel, there's quality metrics for every in-house counsel. There's going to be timeliness metrics. So, for example, during the course of obtaining patents, there can be extensions of time with the Patent and Trademark Office. So if there's an extension of time and it's the fault of the outside counsel, so outside counsel might say, well, hey, we're too backed up. We'll pay for the 1 month extension of time and we'll do a great quality job. And that sounds great, except that in-house counsel, now that gets a check mark on your internal statistics. And so my supervisor might say, well, hey, okay, so let me back up. Everybody gets reviewed. And so it at the end of the day, in-house counsel, there's going to be reviews for bonuses, for promotions, and they're going to look at your statistics. And one of the metrics is going to be extensions of time. And they don't care if the outside law firm paid for it or
Right.
not. They want to see zero extensions of time. So that's one of the metrics. And so there can be some tension with outside counsel where we would say, okay, look, we want to, we really need you to get this done in 3 months. I understand it could be 4 months, but it's going to hurt my internal review. You know, so that's how the pressure goes to the outside counsel.
I'm guessing you had some similar pressures in-house, I guess, if the extension of time was due to your delay.
Well, yes, that would be that would be pretty rare if that would happen. And that could be because we wanted to maybe change direction in a case. But that that rarely came up because usually the responsibility was for outside counsel. But
So
if it
they,
was
yeah, so they would do a proposed amendment and for your review.
of course, it sounds easy like that, but there were three different tiers of review. So, and as a portfolio manager, that was one of the things that we would do is we would score every case. So we would there would be a ranking for enforceability, detectability, commercial necessity, whether or not it has a direct read on the standard. And so there was all these metrics, and then we would give it a final composite score. And then so the in-house counsel would spend the majority of my time was spent on the most important cases. Whereas if a case got scored too low, we might elect to abandon the case. If the case was a mediocre, quality metric, it might be sent to outside counsel and we wouldn't even look at it. So in other words, we would say, okay, this would be part of the defensive portfolio. Complete responsibility is for outside counsel.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of review and a lot of meetings, but
But
I guess
yes, you get used to it.
okay, well, normally we have a two-part segment or but I think we've got enough material, so let's take a break and we'll go on to the third segment, okay? Are you up for that?
Okay, sounds great.
All right.